Welcome to the Better Together podcast. I'm your host, Kyla, and I'm super excited to be kicking off the very first episode. Today we're going to be talking about working to live and not living to work and that work-life balance. But before we get into the topic, I just wanted to kind of introduce myself and talk about what this podcast is going to be about and why I'm doing it. So I have been wanting to do this for a while. I haven't been in the best place mentally, and I've needed some sort of outlet, and I feel like this is that creative outlet for me, so I'm really excited to be doing it. But also, I am 27 years old, and I am in my late 20s now, and I feel like I've been through a lot of ups and downs, and I want to kind of share what I've gone through in my 20s and relate it to what other people are going through in their 20s. So this podcast is really going to be having candid conversations on life's obstacles, from mental health struggles to grief and growing up. So I'm really excited about it. I come from a background in photography, film, and journalism, and I've always been super captivated by the power of storytelling, and especially when it comes to human experience. So that's really what we're going to be talking about, is the human experience. And you don't have to be in your 20s to be listening to this. I am just relating it back to things that I've gone through in my 20s. I also think it's really important to be vulnerable, because I feel like that's how you make other people feel comfortable and be vulnerable. So I want to be vulnerable in this podcast. I want to share things that are really raw and try to create a safe space for people to be able to open up. I really want this to be kind of a collaborative space where I can talk to you guys and you guys can talk to me. And I am interested in your guys' stories and your guys' questions and any advice that you guys may have while listening to this as well. I mentioned that this podcast idea came during a rough patch in my life where I needed a creative outlet. And I think this rough patch where I really came up with this idea, and also am still going through this rough patch, comes a lot from what we're going to be talking about today, which is working to live and not living to work. So I wanted to just start off by sharing, a little bit about what I do. I'm not going to share like the details of where I work or what I do on a day-to-day basis, but I am just going to share like I am in the journalism field, so I work in news, and my job really is like a 9-to-5, like in the corporate world sort of thing, and it can be really mentally draining. And I have always been sort of this, for lack of a better word, to be honest, just like this workaholic type person, where I've always put first my career and work. And I think part of that has been because I have a lot of stuff I've gone through in my personal life and in my family. And so I've always used work and school as an escape from a lot of that. And I think that it's been helpful in a lot of ways, but it's also been kind of detrimental to my mental health. I've always felt like work was part of my identity. And now that I have gone through college and I've gone through grad school and I'm no longer in the entry level of my career, I am more in a place where it's not fulfilling me in the way that it has in the past. And I now am trying to find ways of finding myself again, where it's not just like my work identity, but like what are the things I like to do outside of work? What are the things that fulfill me outside of my day-to-day job. I've struggled because I give so much of myself and I don't get a lot back, and I feel like I've lost a little bit of myself because of that. So I want to start off by talking a little bit how I became a workaholic, and then kind of this point that I realized, whoa, I need to take a step back, and my work is not really my whole life. In 2015, I was just wrapping up my first year in college, and it was a really exciting time. I was enjoying myself, meeting new people, feeling like I was finally with people that I could relate to rather than where I was at in high school. And I was just enjoying myself. And I was studying photography at the time, and it was awesome. I loved it. But my dad ended up passing away suddenly, and that kind of changed everything for me. When I came back from summer to my second year in college, my sophomore year in college, I started to solely focus on school, and I would wake up before 6 a.m. to get to campus and be working at 6 a.m. I started making a habit of this, and I started to compare myself to the people I was in school with. I felt really down when I didn't feel like I just needed to be the best. I wanted to be better than everybody else. And I did that for the rest of my college years. And after I graduated, I, entered the workforce, and I was kind of freelancing and working in different studios and stuff in New York. I had moved to New York after college from Michigan, but I was putting my entire self into work. And then I applied to grad school, and I put my all into grad school, and I was comparing myself. I felt so much pressure around me. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I wanted to drop out at a certain point. I was having suicidal thoughts, and it was a scary time. By the time I got to the end of my grad school, I was in a better place. I had made this beautiful film that I had a goal of making for 2 or 3 years prior to that. And so I felt like I was finally sort of figuring things out, but the forefront of my mind was work. I need to find a job. I need to be the best that I can be at this job. I need to do something with this film. I want it to get into as many film festivals as possible. I want as many people to see it because I want this film to go somewhere. And that was really all I was thinking about, was school, work. How can I do this with my career? How can my name be out there, be known somehow? And then I went through another really life-changing experience, and I lost one of my brothers suddenly. And that was, I don't want to say it was harder than losing my dad, but I feel like the grief from my dad on top of the grief now from my brother and the sudden loss, I lost them in a 5.5 or something in between each other. So it hadn't really been that long since I had lost my dad. And then all of a sudden I'm going through another death, and my brother is gone. And that really shifted my mindset to, oh my God, like my work life, my school life, not important. And I'm not saying that it isn't important. Of course it's important. But comparatively, I was like, whoa, I need to be around my friends more. I need to be around my family more. I need to hone in on my relationships more, and not just focus on work and school and just that, and put my whole self just into that. So that really shifted things for me. And I kind of realized, okay, I need to take a step back. And I ended up going into therapy and all that stuff. So I've learned a lot since then. It's been almost 4 years now since my brother passed away. I'm not in the same place I was in terms of putting my whole self into work, but I'm also not all the way healed from doing that. And right after grad school is really stressful because at the time I had lost my brother right before graduating. I felt like I needed to take the time to just grieve and be with my family and kind of learn how to live again without my brother being there. But I also had to find a job, and I was living in New York, and things are expensive in New York, and I needed stability, but I also felt like it was just hard to even wake up every day. So it was a really hard time, and I was struggling finding work. It took me probably 6 months or a little bit more than that to find a steady job. And when I did, I was like, oh my God, this is life changing. I am going to finally have some stability. I'm going to have health insurance. I'm going to be able to make a little bit more money I've never made before. And so it was also an exciting time in a lot of ways. I was very happy where I was. I felt like I was going to be growing and all of this stuff. And, you know, it's been about 3 years since getting this job, and I feel so burnt out. And I feel like part of that is because I have put my entire self into my job. When you're starting out somewhere, you want to show that you can do the work and you can do it really well, and you want to move up and you want to grow. And what I've come to learn is that it can be very draining when you are constantly, trying to prove yourself. And I have always believed that if you go into something that you're extremely passionate about and love, that you're going to love your job every day. And it's just not the case. Like, I don't think that, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I hate going into work every single day. That's not true. But I do have my days where I don't enjoy it, but I also have my days that I do enjoy it. And I think that there needs to be a better balance, and that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out now. What is that balance? And I think that when you are working full time and you're spending most of your days doing that, it can be exhausting and it can be draining if you don't have other outlets. And so going back to the reason for starting this podcast, a lot of my reasoning for starting this is because I want to do something that feels good to do. And this felt good. It uses all the skills I've learned in school and work, and it's something I'm doing completely on my own, and it feeds into that creative outlet that I need. I think it's extremely important to find just hobbies outside of work and to not isolate yourself. I feel like the times that I am most depressed or feeling really anxious, I am isolating myself. But I will say that in this last year, I have found so many new hobbies, and having those outlets is really important. And I've also think that it's important to kind of take a step back sometimes. And what I realized after my brother died was that I needed to focus more on me. I needed to focus more on the people I love, whether it's my family or my friends, and hone in on those relationships, because that's really what's important in life. It's not just work. And I feel like, especially being in your 20s, it's ingrained in our society that once you finish high school, you have to kind of know what you're interested in, and then get into college and major in the thing that you're supposed to do for the rest of your life, that's going to be your career and whatever. It's so ingrained to have everything kind of figured out. And I was the type of person that had everything figured out. I knew very early on that I was going to study photography. And then I went to school and I studied photography and I loved it. And then I worked in that for a little bit, and then I went back to school to learn about journalism and the documentary space and all of that. And now that I'm working in it, and I have been working in it for the last, few years, I feel more lost than I did. I feel like I've always had things figured out, but now that I'm not like the most satisfied or feeling the most fulfilled in my everyday work, that I'm like kind of questioning what I'm doing. Like, is this what I want to do? And I think what I'm starting to realize, and I don't have this all figured out yet, but what I'm starting to realize is that it's okay not to have it all figured out. I'm still young. I think there's still time to figure things out, and I think it's okay to like go through times where you feel like you have it very figured out and you know exactly what you're going to do, and times where you don't have it completely figured out. And I feel like that's where I'm at now, and I want to really focus on exploring what my next thing is going to be. And I think for now, this podcast is going to feed back into my energy and make me feel a little bit more fulfilled than I have been feeling. But I think it's really hard because there's all these expectations. There's expectations to have it figured out. There's expectations to, make a lot of money. And I think the state of the world right now it's really hard. It's hard to find jobs. It's hard to make, a substantial amount of money depending on, what your career path is. And I think it's okay to be uncomfortable. I want to honor that I feel a little loss, and that it's okay to feel a little loss even at my age at 27. I think there's always time to figure it out, and I think for me and anybody else listening to this who's going through a similar situation, it's important to hone in on the things that do make you feel good. And for me, it's being with my friends. It's reading. It's going to the gym. It's baking and, doing and working on different art projects and doing personal work, even if it's not going to, make me money. Just do something that feels good, because no matter what career you go in, you're not always going to love what you're doing in your job. At the end of the day, it is a job, and you can't put your you can't put your whole self into that. You're so much, as humans, we're so much more than our job. And I think that's also another thing in society that a lot of our own self-worth and what it means to be successful is based on what you do in your job and your career. And there's just so much more to life. And I think that it's okay not to love what you're doing. I think that, you will figure it out eventually. I do believe I will figure it out eventually. And doing things like talking about this on the podcast, doing a podcast for me, and doing all my other hobbies is what's going to feed my energy and fulfill me, make me feel a little bit more fulfilled than I am within my day-to-day work. I don't want my only thing to be my job. So I feel like I said a lot there, so I hope that some of it was helpful. I feel like my head was kind of all over the place because I am, I'm navigating this now. I'm trying to figure it out now. But I'm curious what you guys think of this topic, what you guys are going through within your own jobs. Do you feel similar to me? Do you feel burnt out? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Like, I'd love to know, like, if you have your own advice on this, if you have questions for me. I'm curious. I want to know. I want to hear from you guys. So for future episodes, I'm going to be talking a lot about navigating uncertainty in your 20s, balancing relationships and friendships, heartbreak, grief, and much more. I'm going to be talking about a wide variety of topics, and I think what I'd like to do is talk about things that are going on in my life now as well, or things that I've gone through in the past, so that I can kind of give advice based on my own experiences. The next episode is kind of going to be a fun one. I'm going to be talking about the Myers-Briggs personality test. I'm going to be taking the Myers-Briggs personality test and kind of going through those results. And I think when I talk about something a little bit more heavy, I'd like to then do something a little bit more fun and lighthearted. So with this topic, it's not like the most heavy topic. It's very common to feel how I'm feeling, and I'm sure a lot of you guys feel this way, but I want to talk about something a little bit more fun and lighthearted for the next one. If you liked listening to this today, I encourage you to subscribe to my podcast. You can follow me on my Instagram, which is Kyla_Milberger. You can follow the podcast Instagram, which is the_bettertogether_podcast. And any questions or comments you guys have or stories you have that you want to write in about, you can email that at thebettertogetherpod@gmail.com, or you can write me in on one of my Instagram pages. And all of this will be linked below in the description. You can give me a listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Right now I don't have a visual set up, but I'd like to eventually set up some sort of visual where I post to YouTube as well. So stay tuned for that stuff to come. Just want to say thank you so much for listening to this. I'm really excited for the journey ahead, for what comes with this podcast. And again, thank you so much for listening.